Last weekend, I said to you guys, it is time to dive into the story of some new games, and boy did I pick a good time to do so, because as of yesterday, we got the world reveal for Marathon. Now, Marathon is Bungie's new game. Now, if you don't know who Bungie is, they're the developers behind Halo, they're the developers behind Destiny, and boy do they know how to do lore. Now, Marathon is their new game, and I talked about it in depth yesterday on Ink TV, going into the entire reveal, what the gameplay looks like, everything like that. But this channel and this video is going to be a deep dive into the story. And let's just say this, Marathon was actually a trilogy that started to come out in the year 1994. That is where this website is from. This is a website that has detailed all of the story in the history of Marathon, the 3 trilogy games. Now, this dates back all the way to 1995, but let's just say we want to know about a barbecue for a second, or anything like this. This is all of the lore from a game going back to 1994. Now, I am not going to go that crazy and show you everything here, but what I'm going to do is limit the story down, explain to you the timeline, the story, and how, believe it or not, Destiny, Marathon, and Halo are all interconnected, as well as describe to you and explain to you the story of the new Marathon game.
You ever wonder what happened to these people?
It's not my business.
What you are seeing right here is Marathon, or at the very least, a shell of what Marathon used to be. You see, Marathon is actually a thing. It's specifically a spaceship. Now, it's not just any spaceship, it is the spaceship made out of a moon of Mars. Okay, if you want to understand this, you need to go back a little bit. So Marathon takes place in the year 2794. However, the ship itself was created 300 years earlier. At this time, there was many wars. In fact, 3 different wars going on between the Martians, the aliens, and the humans. And there's a bunch of different factions behind this that we're going to dive into. But at one point, what you need to know is that Marathon was created out of a moon of Mars. And it was done for several different reasons, mainly financial reasons as to why they created it out of the moon. But they made this ship and then they launched it towards another solar system. Now, that solar system goes by the name of Tau Ceti. This is the same solar system where the new Marathon game takes place. And from now on, whenever we talk about Tau Ceti, we are talking about the solar system, but specifically the 4th planet in that solar system, because that's the one that they recognize would be able to be habitable by human beings. So it is now the year 2794. Everyone who is living on Marathon has now come out of stasis, as they've been put into stasis for the last 300 years. And as they're waking up, things start to go awry on the Marathon. Specifically, they are attacked by aliens. And the entire story of the first Marathon, and well, all 3 of the first Marathon games, are told through terminals that you find on the map. Now, as you find them, you find out that they are specifically UESC terminals. Now, the UESC stands for the United Earth Space Council, and this is basically the governing body of Earth. Think of it that way. And what's interesting is on the new Marathon game, all of the bots that are on the map that you have to fight are UESC bots. So we will come back to this, but you are on the UESC Marathon. Keep that in mind as we move forward. Now, as we start to read the terminals, we realize that we are working with 2 different versions of AI that are controlling the Marathon. So the easiest way to look at this is we have Leela, that is the good AI, the one that helps us out, and we will refer to her as the Angel. So Angel will pop up whenever we talk about Leela. And then the other one is Durandal, which in fact the entire second game of Marathon is completely based off of that character. And he's essentially the devil. He does all of the bad stuff, and we'll talk more about him because he's probably the most important character in the entire game. Also, you play as just a security officer for the Marathon, unnamed security officer. What is going on the ship? So basically, as we wake up here, an electromagnetic pulse goes off and aliens start to board the ship. As it turns out, Durandal, the devil, actually let the aliens and reached out and told them that we were coming to land on Tau Ceti 4. The aliens then show up and try to stop us for unknown alien reasons. So there's two different alien races. There's the Sphit, or S''PHT. We'll just call them the insectoid alien race. They are the ones that you are actually fighting on the ship, but they are being controlled by the Four, spelt PFHOR. The Four will become very important, but just know that essentially the Four have kind of brainwashed the insects to come on board and attack the Marathon. Throughout this, Leela ends up helping us out and telling us how to stop them, and eventually it's actually Durandal that brings us on board the Four ship, and we end up finding a piece of equipment that is actually controlling the bug people. We destroy that piece of equipment and stop the attack on the Marathon. That's essentially the story of Marathon 1. The bug people and the Four attack the Marathon, and we stop them. We also find out that Durandal was the one that screwed us over. Now, the second game is almost entirely about Durandal, and it takes place on a completely different alien planet. So, essentially, the entire story of the next two games is about Durandal trying to survive the inevitable demise of the universe. From what we're seeing, the new Marathon game doesn't really dive too deep into that. However, there's a couple things that do point towards Durandal that we'll get into. So as a whole, the new story only really focuses after the events of the first Marathon game. So in the year 2794, at this point, the people on Marathon then go on to the planet Tau Ceti and they colonize it. They start building there, they create their world there, but it is that year, the exact same year, that the Four do not like what's going on here, so they bomb the crap out of the Marathon and bomb the crap out of Tau Ceti 4. And basically destroy everything. As they say in the transmissions, they turn it to glass. They glass the entire thing, and everything alive on that planet and on Marathon is killed. And in fact, that is actually what we see within the new trailer. Now, as this is happening, Durandal is essentially trying to destroy Leela. However, before Durandal does, she manages to get one last message off back to Earth, basically telling them exactly what is happening here and asking them for help. Now, here's the thing. At this point, the best technology that the Marathon had was light speed technology, which meant that to send a message back to Earth, it would take between 92 and 94 years. So the Earth didn't get that message from between 2886 to 2888. Now, here's the thing. It has been a long time since the Earth heard anything about this. Over 300 years, well over 300 years. So during this time, they have been improving their technology, and now they can travel to Tau Ceti almost instantaneously, as opposed to taking 300 years to do so. So they receive this message, and the UESC immediately plans a response. This can really be the only reason why in the gameplay that we saw this weekend, that the UESC is already established on the planet, because they got Leela's message and immediately made a response returning to Tau Ceti. Now, what is going on with these other characters on the planet? So the events of Marathon take place essentially 5 years after that transmission was received in the year 2893.
Welcome once again. Once again. How's the new shell? Feeling?
I mean, it feels just like what it is, right? Like $1 trillion. Like $1 trillion.
Sakaguchi Genetics sent a reminder. Your shell repayment is coming up and will be charged against your line of credit.
Yeah, I know. Do you mind if we skip the formalities this time? Got a big contract waiting down there, so.
Understood. Let's proceed with your grounding exercise. Are you familiar with this item?
That's my lucky charm. Yeah, it's supposed to be my lucky charm.
So what is going on there? Now, what you saw there is a shell. It is essentially a robot that someone's essentially behavior or personality, or you could even say brain, has been put inside of. You play as these runners or shells, and that is how you can play as the various different characters throughout the game. You're not actually a human on the planet. You are a human in the body of a robot on the planet of Tau Ceti. Now, you also may have heard a name in there of Sakaguchi Genetics. That is one of the companies, factions, or sponsors that are going to give you contracts in the game. Now, we're going to talk about those companies right now, but first, the other thing that you need to know about the shells is apparently when you're inside them, you actually do forget some of the things about yourself, as we hear when they are showing a picture of themselves as a child.
Can you identify her?
Yeah, that's my mom. That's your mother. Your mother.
Now,
You know that's
consider
your
this. Do you recognize this child?
Who are you? I don't know.
It's you.
What? Really?
Now, some of these sponsors and companies, we will get into the purpose and why they're there, but they include a company called Cyber Acme. Then we have New Caloric. This seems to be the company that provides a lot of the consumables that you will find on the maps. Then we have Traxxas. This is a company that provided some of the utilities like toilets, for example, that made Marathon possible to begin with. Then we have MITA. This is essentially a terrorist organization that fought against the UESC on Mars. Big history behind this one, but you may also recognize that name, and we'll come back to that one in a minute. And then we have Sakaguchi Genetics, who is seemingly providing the shells of the people that are going to Tau Ceti. But why are all of these companies going there? So remember how we talked about that message that made its way back to the UESC? Well, originally they were the ones in charge of the first Marathon expedition, but all of these companies that we just talked about helped the UESC with it. Whether you're talking about like Traxxas sending toilets or facilities with the UESC, or we have Sakaguchi Genetics trying to help out with this other technology, or New Caloric sending the nutrition or consumables for the journey. They were all involved in one way or another, and what they realized is there was a lot of money, and on top of that, the potential for power coming from Tau Ceti. So essentially, they're trying to extract the resources from this planet, but instead of using human bodies, they use these things called shells or runners to implant people's personalities and minds inside of to go and essentially farm the planet. Now, why not use people? Well, one, it's bad for investors, and number two, as we saw, whatever the 4 did to Tau Ceti 4, it made it so that the planet is nearly uninhabitable and has some very bad things going on with it. That's one of the first things we see in that cutscene. But there is also one other thing with this planet.
You ever wonder what happened to these people?
It's not my business.
You see, it was said that the 4 glassed Tau Ceti. However, there appears to be buildings that were left behind after the planet was bombed. And as we see there, these runners do not even know what originally happened here, how all of the humans were wiped out, why were they destroyed. It seems like there was maybe some sort of disease that took people over after the bombing of the planet. So not only were the 4 causing some sort of attack on the planet, but it also appears as though the planet was attacking the people in and of themselves. And I think that'll be one of the broad mysteries that these runners find out upon extracting from this planet. So that is the broad story of Marathon as a whole. I could have probably done an 1.5-hour video going through all of the lore, but I figured just a brief summary of what is going on here would suffice. But there is a couple more things I wanted to point out. Number one, the crossover between Destiny, Marathon, and Halo. Now again, this is something we could dive way deeper into, and if you'd like to see that, you can show me by hitting that like button or letting me know down in the comments. But keeping this very, very simple, just starting out with Marathon, if you have a quick look at their logo, this is actually something that can be found in the very original Halo Combat Evolved logo right dead in the center. Also, if we take a quick look at the timeline of Marathon, The events of Halo basically take place in the year 2552, 2553, and in the marathon timeline, there is a giant 100-year gap that Halo would be right in the middle of. Now, the marathon timeline does end up going quite literally to infinity. However, the events that we know of kind of end in the year 2894. And we know that Destiny seemingly takes place somewhere in the early 3000s. So in other words, after the events of Marathon. But if you're a Marathon player, you may have picked up on the one thing. One of the companies of Mida is also a company in Destiny to make one of the most popular weapons of all time, which is the Midas multi-tool. And in fact, the lore of this weapon that can be found in Game of Destiny is this. The rifle was designed by a primitive AI and manufactured for use by a revolutionary government named Mida. Mars is damnably arid, perhaps. And guess what? That is the backstory of Mida in Marathon. So again, if you want to see more about those crossovers, show me by hitting that like button. But as far as the rest of the story goes, there's one last clip I wanted to point out, because it appears as though this operation of sending these runners down onto Tau City has gotten quite large. At one point in the trailer, you can see all of these kind of rooms that all of these runners are inside. So it seems as though the predominant story is going to be around these runners, what they are finding, and what happened on Tau Ceti. However, there is one other thing that is extremely interesting. Remember how I brought up Durandal before, how he is that kind of evil AI? Well, the quote that they keep using every time they show the logo, it's in the bottom right-hand corner, and at the very end of the trailer, they say, "Escape will make me God." This is a quote from Durandal near the end of the first game. Now, we don't know how Durandal's going to fit into this, but I thought I would leave you guys off with one thing, and that is the quote which led up to this statement. It said the following: "The only limit to my freedom is the inevitable closure of the universe, as inevitable as your own last breath. And yet, there remains time to create and escape. Escape will make me God."